Last night, more than 2,000 people were injured Tuesday and early Wednesday as riot police stormed Istanbul's central square. Today, the square is clear and surrounded by riot police, though some protesters remain in a nearby park. Dr. David Pollock is the Kaufman Fellow at the Washington Institute for Near East Policy. He joins us now. Dr. Pollock, good morning.
Good morning to you.
Okay, the first thing I think you'd want to clear this up is people see protesting in a square, they think Cairo, but that's unfair.
Right.
How come?
Yes, I think that there are really big differences between what we saw in Cairo in Tahrir Square 2 years ago and what we're seeing in Istanbul in Taksim Square today. First of all, just the scale of it. The protests in Cairo swelled to hundreds of thousands and eventually even millions of Egyptians crowding squares and streets, not just in Cairo, but all over the country.
And how large was this one?
That's not what's happening. Well, this one, I think by the largest estimates, might have been about, at its height, maybe in the tens of thousands, low tens, 20, maybe 30,000 people. And by now, after about 2 weeks of protests, we're talking really just about a couple of thousand.
Okay.
And today, only a few hundred are left.
And another point to make here probably is that the democratic institutions in Turkey are much stronger than they are in Egypt. I want to ask you, how has Prime Minister Erdogan decisively crushed these protests at this point?
You know, you can't ever be 100% sure, but I would say probably yes. And the danger that I see looking forward a few days is if Prime Minister Erdogan follows through on his promise or threat, depending on which side you're on, to bring his supporters out into the streets, which he said he would do this weekend, then we may see some pretty nasty confrontations between pro and anti-Erdogan protesters scattered around the country. But I think that although personally I'm sympathetic to the protesters, I think that they have been divided by the government's tactics. Erdogan is supposed to meet with some of them today, but not others. And they have also failed to create a dent so far in the popular support that Erdogan does enjoy among his supporters, which I think are probably about half of the Turkish population. And Erdogan is successfully catering to that base.
Do you think, some people wonder whether Erdogan's rule is a sign that all of this is a sign that Turkey could lose some of the secular traditions that really it adopted post-Ataturk a century ago?
Yeah. Well, that's already happening.
Could it become another Islamic superstate?
No, I think that there are limits to how far this process of Islamization is likely to go in Turkey. And in fact, the fact that these protests are taking place is one of the limits that Erdogan or any Turkish government will face in trying to Islamize this country more than has happened over the last few years. Because about half of the Turkish population is pretty staunchly secular. And traveling in Turkey all around the country myself a few weeks ago, I rediscovered the existence of a very strong current of resentment against further Islamization of Turkish society and public life. So I think the Turks themselves are going to resist this trend.
Okay. Dr. David Pollock from the Washington Institute for Near East Policy, thanks so much for joining us this morning.
Sure.